This genuinely terrified me, and still does to this day. We're lucky to have gotten away safely. Please be extra cautious with your kids, no matter what the situation is. I haven't told this story in a while, because it makes me shake with anger when I do, but I figured it might be good to tell it. Please bear with the long story. This all dates back to about a year and a half ago, when my daughter was around 4 months old. I'm 26 and female, by the way. I had just moved with my then SO to a dangerous part of town, but the particular street we moved to wasn't actually too bad. Everyone knew their neighbors and everyone seemed to get along. Well, since everyone in the neighborhood chatted with one another, my neighbors warned my SO and I about this homeless woman that parked her van on the street and harassed everyone who walked by her car, and to try and avoid her as best as possible. Side note, parking in this town is street parking only, no reserved spots. This will have some significance later. I thought to myself, meh, it's one small downside to living here, alongside street parking. Not that big a deal as long as I avoid her, right? Wrong. So the next day, after our neighbor's warning, after returning home from a long day at work and picking up my infant daughter, the homeless lady, a really slender meth head, wearing what appeared to be newish clothes and breath reeking of something foul, was walking up the left side of the sidewalk, screaming up a storm at these teenage kids who looked terrified. The teenagers aren't engaging her, just kept walking and looking at each other with uncertainty. I stay on the right side of the sidewalk, even though I knew I'd have to cross the small street to the left where my apartment was located. My daughter wakes up from her nap in my arms and begins to coo. The homeless lady spots me crossing the street with my purse, work bag, my baby, her baby bag, and decided it was a good idea to come and chat me up about her conspiracy theories as I'm walking up to my apartment. Fine, I guess, no big deal. At least she's not bothering those kids anymore. Then, as I'm fumbling to get my keys to open the gate that leads to my complex, she asks for money. I tell her the truth. I'm sorry, but I don't carry any cash on me. All the while trying to hold on to my baby, find my keys, hold all my bags. Her response? Stuck-up bitch. Then she continues muttering under her breath, which I must repeat was rank, and starts harassing more kids down the block. A couple months go by and she just continuously comes up to harass me, as if she doesn't recall who I am every single day. Every day I politely apologize and say I need to get home, or that I still don't have any money, even simply that I don't have time to chat right now. Every answer I gave her was met with an insult, both directly and under her breath. At this point though, I was still not concerned. I've always had a soft spot for the homeless, and I'm aware that this lady has severe mental illness. I always apologize for not having money to give, even through the insults. One night around midnight, my daughter wakes up crying horribly. My SO and I take her temperature, 103-degree fever. I tell him it's time to take her to the emergency room immediately before it gets any worse. We gather everything up and I gently take her from bed and lay her against my chest. She was so helpless and weak, burning hot and whimpering terribly. I still want to tear up thinking about it to this day. So, as we walk out the apartment, my SO says he'll run ahead down 3 blocks to grab the car. Remember, it's all street parking, so we often had to park blocks away. I said okay. I'd stand in front of the apartment so he could just pick us up and we could go to the ER immediately. That was the wrong choice. I watched as he ran all the way down the street and turned the corner out of sight. Then I looked back at my baby and start rocking and shushing her so that maybe she could get a little bit of sleep or rest before being up at the hospital all night. Moments later, when I look up, the homeless lady walks around the same corner that SO just ran around and makes a beeline straight toward me. I get a little bit uneasy as I have a sick baby in my hands now, but maybe she'll just leave me alone this time, right? No, that was wishful thinking to the max. In a voice loud enough to wake the entire block practically, she said this, "Oh, hey there, sis. Daddy just told me that baby's done sick and needs a healer." I was still trying to gently rock my baby as she was startled back awake, wondering why the fuck he told this lady about the baby being sick. What? I'm sorry? I'm a healer. My mama and I been healers since birth, so give me that baby. Still trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, knowing she was mentally ill, I said, "Sorry, I'm waiting on her dad to bring the car around so we could take her to the hospital. Can you keep your voice down a bit? She's trying to sleep." "Nah, baby girl, I'm a healer, didn't you hear me? I done said I was a healer. You know what a healer is, don't you? So give me that baby." At this point, she reached out and put her incredibly dirty hands on my daughter's foot and wouldn't let go. "Excuse me, let her go now." "Give me that baby, you bitch. Let me heal her, you selfish bitch." I turned to her and gave her dead eye contact. "If you don't let go right now, I will kill you." She and I locked eyes, and her facial expression was what I can only describe as the most terrifying, evil look a person can give, with her eyes and smile widening with every passing second. Her face still haunts me. Then she broke out in a laugh so loud and terrifying, I can't believe I didn't piss myself. By this time, my daughter was crying hysterically. My internal dialogue was something like this. "Fuck, where the fuck is my SO? I'm gonna have to get my sick infant daughter on the ground and kick this bitch's ass just to get her to not kidnap my kid." It also crossed my mind that if I did that, I'd probably be the one arrested. Like a Hail Mary though, my SO comes around the corner in the car, and I reiterate to the lady that my SO is now here, and if she doesn't stop harassing me, I will kill her. This finally struck some chord inside her brain, and she took off running down the street, cursing profanities very loudly. My daughter's cry had me in tears too, after she was yanked so hard by this lady. I still wonder what would have happened if she yanked hard enough to take my sick daughter from me. My SO ended up admitting that he felt bad for her, so he told her our baby was sick and even struck up a conversation with her about it. Needless to say, he's now my ex. He even laughed later about the entire thing and told me I was exaggerating and she was harmless. He also still struck up regular conversations with the woman after that, anytime he'd see her, and it infuriated me. I don't think anyone who would have seen the look in this woman's face would ever label her as harmless. She looked very much like she was ready to harm. When I was about 16 years old, I worked at a restaurant as a pianist. It was a nice semi-formal restaurant, not exactly very trendy, but seen as a well-established place where parents would take their graduating children and elderly couples would have their date nights. White tablecloths and fresh flowers on every table. It was a pretty popular place. It was a great gig, especially since I was quite young at the time. My parents would drop me off in the evenings twice a week, Friday and Saturday nights. It was in an older part of town, the kind of place where you don't go walking around at night. I live in South Africa though, so you pretty much never walk at night anyway. We have car guards in most South African cities, and while there's sometimes dodgy guys trying to make some quick drug money because they found a reflective vest in the trash, my restaurant had a very wonderful guard actually. His name was Daddy, and he was a huge dude from Zimbabwe. He'd always walk me up the path when my parents dropped me off and come to tell me when they had arrived to pick me up. Part of my pay was a free staff meal, and on this occasion my mother had decided to come in early with me, so we could share a nice meal together. As we walked in, the owner immediately saw me and dashed over to us, clearly bursting to tell me something. Apparently, earlier that day, a man had come in and asked him if the pianist started at 8 tonight as usual. The owner, Paul, had confirmed yes, and asked if he wanted to book a table. He said no, and Paul, seeing that the man looked like he probably couldn't afford to eat there anyway, asked as to why he'd even inquired in the first place. The man informed him that he had this dream, a dream he was going to come in and marry the pianist. The pianist was his soulmate, and he wasn't going to miss out on this chance to let her know. Quite bewildered at this information, and thinking maybe it was a friend from school just playing a joke, I asked what the guy even looked like. I remember Paul trying to put it as nicely as possible. Well, he was sort of short, 30-ish, plump, long hair, had a hat on too. I had no friends who matched this description, and at this stage I was the only female pianist at the establishment, so my mother and I were quite weirded out. We sat down on the closed-in balcony to order right by a big window. It was about 7:45 and still quite dark outside. I was getting ready to leave the table to start playing when a movement in the shrubs outside the window caught my eye. "Mom," I whispered. She looked over to where I had just jerked my head. There, skulking outside the window in the bushes, watching us, was a short, very overweight guy. He was wearing all black with a dirty black trench coat and a black fedora as well. He had long, dark, stringy hair and a large silver cross hanging around his neck. It was a horrible, sinking feeling, realizing he was watching me and had been the entire time. I don't know if it was mostly because I was pretty young and sheltered, but realizing that this strange man knew who I was, what I looked like, thought about me and wanted to marry me, made me feel almost debilitated with fear. My mom, however, quickly realized that while I was in view of the window, she was not. She told me, "Stay there," and got up and left the table, staying out of view of the man. She went to the manager immediately and got him to phone Daddy on his cell phone. We were sitting toward the back of the restaurant, and Daddy was on the street. After about a minute of me sitting there pretending not to notice this beady-eyed, sweating man outside, I saw the light of Daddy's torch bouncing off the hedges. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the man begin to panic and scuffle around, trying to work out which way to escape. I took this opportunity to stand up and get away from the window. I sat in the back until Daddy came in to tell me it was okay to start playing now. They never told me whether he ran away or had to be removed or even what exactly happened. They refused to tell me any details, which sort of made me more apprehensive. Daddy just said that the man would never be coming back around to bother me again. He told me that the man drove a rusty red small car. I'd later find out it was a really old Fiat Uno. I found out because every 2 weeks or so, on one of the nights I was working, it would be parked right down the street, far enough away from the restaurant that Daddy couldn't do anything about it. Sometimes even around the corner, just out of eyesight until we were driving home. I knew the sound of the car, the rattly old exhaust pipe. I even knew the number plate. Sometimes when we'd drive past, I could see a shadow of him in the driver's seat. Sometimes I couldn't. I always wondered where he was hiding in those times. From then on, my parents had Daddy's number saved to their phones, and my dad would come and get me when it was dark. Sometimes when I was waiting to be picked up if we closed early, I started heading down the path to see if my parents were back. Daddy would see me from the gate. Sometimes he beckoned me to come down and wait with him instead, and we'd hang out together. Sometimes he'd shake his head and say, "Not yet, sissy." That's when the car would be down the street. I really never did actually see the man again though, so there was never anything I could really do about it. It was always in the back of my mind though. I continued to work there until my final year of high school, and I quit when Daddy moved back to Zimbabwe. So to Daddy, my friend and protector, thank you. And to the creepy black fedora stranger in the rusty red car, I hope we never meet again. Back in 1998 or 99 or so, I was around 5 or 6 years old and living in a crime and drug-ridden part of the downtown area. Our house had a giant backyard that was full of thick jungle-like trees and bushes that had been taken over by the earth and also random passerbys. We knew this due to all of the heroin needles that were around and half of a mattress that had once been on the forest floor that had since grown 15 feet into the air with the trees. There was also a path that people would use as a shortcut to the main road, so there was a lot of traffic with shady people passing through. When you're a kid, this is a nightmare of a backyard, so I was spooked since the very moment we moved in. I would complain constantly to my mom about someone watching me from outside my window when I would try to sleep. Once or twice, there had been times of him watching me, and he had shined a flashlight into my room. I had even seen a flash of his face for a brief moment, which I can still picture. His dark eyes burned through me, and for a while I never said anything about this, but eventually I did tell someone. My mom had always said it was just a nightmare, and brushed it off for a week or two while ignoring my relentless complaints. Eventually, after having a fight with me to go to sleep one night, my mom had dragged me outside the next morning to prove me wrong. We went outside to my window, and to her surprise, the grass had clearly been stomped on only outside of my window, to the point where all of it was almost dead and only mud remained. There were also lots of scratch marks from a tool of some kind outside the window, as if the person had been trying to break in. I was in a basement with one of those tiny windows that don't even open, so breaking in through there was super unlikely. But this incident still shook my family. My mom was very horrified and started making plans to move away, but we were so broke growing up that leaving right away was just not an option. Around that same time, I and my best friend, who was also my next-door neighbor, had become pretty much inseparable. We hung out almost constantly and had no sense of danger practically. We would do dumb stuff like go to other neighbors' houses and ask for random candy. Our favorite was this elderly lady who always had hostess cakes for us, who would actually just go inside her house to hang out there. Thankfully, she was unbelievably nice and took care of us in a way. Our parents had no idea we even did this. It was like our little secret. One day, we were playing around the neighborhood, and my mom yelled for me to come home so we could go pick up dinner just around the corner. We were only gone for 15 minutes at most, and when we came back to the house, we were in complete shock. The street was closed off with crime scene tape, and there were 2 or 3 news station vans, a dozen police cars at least, and either a life flight copter getting ready to touch down or a news helicopter. It turned out that while we were gone getting food, a man who was not from the neighborhood but who had been staying with his mom for the last few weeks had walked past my best friend's yard and seen her on the phone. She was talking to a friend and making faces or whatever it is young kids do. This man apparently thought she was making fun of him specifically and talking about him on the phone. This man got so upset at the thought of someone making fun of him that he walked back to his mom's house, came back with a butcher knife, and planned to kill my friend for mistreating him. Because of where she was sitting on the porch, she could see him coming back with the knife and ran inside the home and locked herself in the bathroom and called the police with the phone she luckily already had in her hand. Unfortunately, my friend's mom was in the kitchen and was not as lucky. The man took his anger out on her mother and stabbed her so many times I can't even remember the number. I think it was in at least the high 20s. Somehow, after the amount of times her mother was stabbed, she still survived, thankfully, and made a full recovery after many surgeries. After his arrest, the story was all over the news. I remember watching it with my mom pretty religiously to make sure my friend's mom would be okay. They posted the man's mugshot, and I remembered the most intense, severe amount of fear flowing through me. The man who had stabbed this woman was also the man who would watch me from outside my window. I later found out that we had actually met this man weeks earlier at the elderly lady's house we frequented for candy. That was her son, and he had initially met us at her house and been keeping an eye on us ever since. He had only just gotten out of prison a month or so earlier and was staying with her since his release. I had never taken note of him when we first met, but maybe if I did, I would have known right away who my night stalker was and could have prevented what happened to my friend's mom. We never did end up moving. My mom figured the danger was already gone with the guy arrested, so we stayed for another year. To this day, I still can't sleep with my blinds open. To the creep who would watch me sleep and tried to murder my friend and her mother, I hope we never meet again and that you're still rotting in jail somewhere. This story is about an event that happened to my mother around 1972, when she was 8 years old. She's told me about it since I was young, and she truly thinks about it and is still affected to this day. To set the scene, both of my grandparents ran a restaurant/gas station in our hometown. They've always run a business of some type since the 50s. This means that a lot of days my mom would have to take the school bus home and stay by herself if my grandma had to stay and help run things, usually no more than an hour or two though. My uncle, her older brother, would usually come home on the bus with her, but he was a little bit older and sometimes had to stay after for football practice. So was the case on the day of the event I'm getting to. So my mother arrived home on this day, let herself into the house and started to put away her things. She had just recently received a new puppy, and the first thing she needed to do was take the pup out to the yard to use the restroom. She wrapped the dog up in a white towel, which is important, and walked him outside. As she put the dog down, she shook its hair out of the blanket, flailing it about in the wind. It was then that she noticed the neighbor's son was staring at her from across the street. This guy was in his late 20s and was known to be very strange and severely mentally ill, though in the country mental illness seems to not always be recognized. He would always do psycho shit like killing the neighbor's pigs or skinning stray cats and hanging them from a clothesline in their yard. Real sick shit. My mom said he always creeped her and everyone else out. She said he would stare at her when she would play outside, and generally made her very uncomfortable. She said he appeared out of nowhere in his yard that day, and as she shook out the blanket, he began grinning and waving. Feeling more than a little bit shook, she picked up her pup and went inside and locked the door. She had just begun to do some homework, and after about 5 minutes of work, she suddenly heard a loud knock at the door. She slowly walked over to the window to see who it was. She knew it couldn't be my grandparents because of course they had keys. As she opened the blinds, her eyes locked with those of the creep from across the street. He was already looking into the window. She jumped up and screamed a little as she shut the blinds. She walked over to the door and made sure it was locked. She said he just continued with a slow, continuous thud on the door, almost a rhythm of knocking. Then she got really terrified as he began to call out to her through the door. "Hi, sweetie. I saw you with your doggy. Let me in to see him." She was in shock. "Come on and let me in, sweetie. Please, I just want to see your puppy." In full freakout mode, my mom screamed, "You need to leave now. Go back to your house. I don't know you." He kept knocking though. I can see the fear in my mom's eyes when she describes that part, and it gives my whole body chills. He called through the door once again. "Damn it, let me in! I saw you waving your flag of surrender." I shit you not. The guy thought my mom shaking hair from this blanket was a flag of surrender and a sign for him to come over. She screamed, "I'm calling my dad and the police if you don't leave now." With this, the knocking finally stopped. She tried to catch her breath and shake off the fear. Then she got up from the door and ran to the basement level of the home. It was an old house, so the kitchen and rec room were down there, with the only phone in the house as well. She made it to the phone and began to dial 911. All of a sudden, she heard a shatter from the next room. She looked over to see the crazed neighbor attempting to crawl through the kitchen window. He was ripping down the curtain as his upper body got through, and my mother screamed what was happening to the police on the phone. All of a sudden, he was bleeding from the abdomen where the window glass had cut him, as his lower half couldn't quite squeeze through. Then my mom began hearing my grandmother's screams. "What the hell are you doing?" The guy began yelling in pain and squirming at the window as she hit him from behind with some tool that was laying in the garden on the side of the house where the entrance to the window was. He managed to wriggle his way out and bolted to his house. The police came, Grandma called my grandfather, and he arrived as well after shutting down the business as soon as she told him. They arrested him for breaking and entering, and something else that I believe was unrelated. A probation violation or something, I assume. On the day of his court date, he told them the white flag of surrender story, but this was the final nut on his crazy cake, as they put him in a mental institution that very same day. He may have gotten out, but went back because my mother said he later died in an institution as well. Outside the courthouse, the crazy Appalachian redneck family of the creep tried to blame my 8-year-old mother, and the man's father called my mother a harlot. Needless to say, my army-trained grandpa beat the guy's ass on the courthouse steps as the local cops all turned a blind eye. That story has always stuck with me. My mom's had to receive therapy for it, so it haunts her a lot as well to this day. We can't help but wonder though, what would he have done to her if my grandma didn't come home at that exact moment? This happened February 14th, Valentine's Day. Me and two of my friends decided we would get a cheap hotel room and they would take some LSD to kick off the loneliest holiday ever. I've done it myself before, but I was not in a particularly good mindset to take it that night, so instead I settled for a bottle of wine. Anyway, we weren't very familiar with the area of the hotel/motel we booked the room at. It was cheap though, and that's all that mattered to us. It was around 3 in the morning. When outside the door, we hear someone stumbling around and bumping into walls. It was Valentine's Day, so we brushed it off at first as a drunk couple going to get it on. The stumbling stopped outside our door though, and then suddenly got silent. My friends were tripping balls at this point, and I was pretty damn drunk. We hear this woman start sobbing outside our door. I'm assuming she sat down with her back against it because we heard her slide down the wall and collapse right on the other side. The woman starts trying to speak to us through the cracks of the door outline, saying she'd just lost her dogs and was wondering if we could come help her. It was 3 a.m. and we didn't know shit about this area, so common sense would say not to respond, so we didn't. The woman then started slamming on the door, claiming we stole her dogs, and she was going to come in and murder every single one of us sluts. She was scratching and slamming on this door for 10 minutes straight. Then suddenly she just stopped. My friends were starting to have a bad trip because of her, but when she stopped, I tried to reassure them she was gone and they could go back to having a good time. To prove it to my friends, I checked through the peephole to verify the woman was indeed gone. Instead, what I saw was her staring right back at me through the other side of the peephole with her face pressed against it. I watched her as she stepped back and stood there, still and solid as a literal concrete statue. She had her eyes right on the peephole, staring right into my soul. I doubt she could actually see me through it, but I was making dead eye contact with her. The woman then proceeded to start wailing and screaming, throwing her body against the door, which thankfully woke up our neighbors, and they called the front desk for help. The woman behind the front desk came out and tried to get this person to leave. She did eventually, but was going down the walkways of the hotel, screaming and not leaving the property, still crying out for her lost dogs in the hotel hallway at 3 a.m. After that, the cops were called on this woman and she disappeared, but she never actually left the hotel. They were running around all the halls trying to find her. The woman at the front desk asked me if I could give a better description or had any information for the police. Me, being an underage girl drunk out of my mind, tried to decline, but the cops ended up coming to the door anyway, and I tried my best to act like an innocent little sober girl. They said they never saw her leave, and implied she was still inside, so they just told me to keep an eye out for her and call the front desk if anything else happened. The police stayed posted outside the hotel for about an extra 30 minutes, then finally left. Turns out the bitch was just on crack. But still, hearing this woman throw her body into the door, saying she would murder us, was traumatizing enough. We left early that morning and never went back. Thanks to this woman for killing my friend's trips and my drunkenness. What a killjoy.